I walked away from my dying husband. Then a nurse said something I'll never forget. "Hey guys, before we start today's video, I need your help. I have noticed that the channel is losing traction and subscribing is one of the best way that this channel growing together. Thank you very much." I never thought I'd walk away from someone I once vowed to love forever. But that's exactly what I did. The day started like any other in the hospice ward, silent, sterile, humming with the low sounds of machines keeping people barely tethered to life. I walked into that pale room where my husband lay, his body frail, his breath uneven, machines beeping every few seconds like a reminder of time slipping away. I stood at the doorway longer than I should have, just looking at him. He hadn't opened his eyes in days. The doctors told me he might not again. They said I should talk to him, say goodbye, or just sit with him. Whatever I needed for closure. Closure. That word felt like a betrayal. I wasn't sure I wanted closure. Not yet. Not like this. I walked up to him, leaned over, and whispered his name, but there was nothing. Just the sound of my own voice echoing back like it didn't belong. In the room, a nurse came in quietly, checking his vitals. Adjusting his four, she gave me a sympathetic glance like she'd seen this 100 times before. I hated that glance. It made me feel like I was already a widow. My fingers grazed his hand. It was cold, not lifeless, but not full of life either. I sat for hours. Memories crashed over me. Our wedding day, that ridiculous camping trip where he almost set the tent on fire. The day we found out we were pregnant, and then the day we lost the baby. We had lived 1,000 lifetimes in our marriage. And yet, now, sitting beside him, I felt like I didn't even know who he was anymore. I felt like I didn't know who I was. The guilt was a thick cloud in my throat. I should have visited more, stayed longer, fought harder. But how do you fight for someone who stopped fighting a long time ago? I remembered the night he told me he was done with chemo. He had tears in his eyes, not because he was scared to die, but because he didn't want me to suffer through it. "All with him, I'm tired," he had said. "Let me go." I screamed at him that night, threw a mug at the wall, begged him not to give up. He only looked at me with that same expression he used to give when he had already made up his mind. So I had backed off. We went through the motions, doctor visits, hospice paperwork, long quiet evenings, and then the hospital stay came. The doctors said he had days, maybe weeks, and now he was slipping inch by inch. I stared at the hospital monitor like maybe it would tell me something his body couldn't. Like maybe if I watched it long enough, I'd see a sign, a heartbeat jump, a spike in oxygen. But the lines stayed steady, too steady. The nurse returned and offered me coffee. I declined. She paused for a second, looked at me closely, and asked if I wanted to talk. I shook my head. Talking felt pointless. What was there to say? I watched my husband of 17 years fade in front of me. I had no words. After a while, I stood up. Something inside me snapped. I couldn't stay in that room anymore. I needed air, space, a break from the sadness pressing against every wall. I leaned down, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "I'll be back." But I didn't come back. I didn't mean to disappear. I just walked. Down the hospital hallway, out through the sliding doors, past the parking lot, onto the sidewalk. I kept walking until I found myself in a park nearby, sitting on a bench staring at a duck pond. I must have sat there for hours. No phone calls, no updates, just silence. My mind was blank, which was a blessing in its own way. Eventually, guilt started to bubble up. I had left him alone. What if he passed while I was gone? What if those were his last moments and I had selfishly taken a walk to escape my own discomfort? I got up and started walking back, but then stopped again. What if he was gone? Could I handle that? Could I walk into that room and see an empty bed? My steps slowed, then stopped completely. I turned and walked into a coffee shop instead. I ordered something I didn't even drink, just to sit, just to delay the moment. I stared at the cup for a long time before I picked it up and left. The sky had darkened by then. I walked back to the hospital like someone walking toward their own sentencing. As I entered the corridor, I noticed the nurse from earlier standing. Near the room, her face was calm, unreadable. She saw me and walked over. "You okay?" she asked softly. I didn't answer. I just nodded. She looked me up and down like she was about to say something, then turned toward the room. But before she could walk away, she said something that made me freeze. "He asked for you." Those 4 words hit me like a punch to the chest. He asked for me. While I was out escaping, while I was sipping coffee and hiding from reality, he had been awake, aware, and he had asked for me. My knees buckled slightly. The nurse reached out to steady me, then led me to a nearby chair. "He was only awake for a moment," she said. "It wasn't long, but he said your name twice, and then he said, 'He forgives you.' Forgives me. For what?" I hadn't done anything, at least not anything unforgivable. Or had I? My mind began racing through all the fights, the silences, the times I shut down emotionally while he was in pain. Maybe he knew. Maybe he sensed how far I'd emotionally drifted even while physically staying. Maybe he forgave me for leaving earlier. Or maybe he forgave me for planning to leave him long before cancer made that decision for us. I sat there, stunned, eyes stinging. The nurse continued gently. He also asked me to tell you something, but I wasn't sure if I should say it unless you came back. I looked up. Tell me, I whispered. She looked unsure for a second, then sat beside me. He said, she thinks I don't know, but I do, and it doesn't matter anymore. Tell her I loved her the whole time. The tears came then, fast and uncontrollable, because I knew what he meant. He did know. He knew. I had emotionally left the marriage months ago. That while he was fighting for breath, I had been drowning in my own resentment and guilt. That I had once thought about divorce, had even drafted an email to a lawyer but never sent it. He must have sensed it. And yet, in the end, his final message to me wasn't anger. It was love. That broke me in a way nothing else could. I stood up slowly, steadied myself, and walked to his room. He was still there, eyes closed, breath shallow, but alive. I pulled a chair closer and took his hand. It was slightly warmer than before. I don't know if he could hear me, but I spoke anyway. I told him I was sorry. I told him I loved him, even when I forgot how to show it. I told him that he had been the best part of my life, even in the darkest seasons. I stayed through the night, watching over him like he had watched over me so many times in our life together. In the early morning light, as the sun peeked through the narrow hospital window, he stirred slightly. His eyes fluttered open just a sliver. I leaned closer, and for a brief flickering second, he smiled. It was faint, barely there, but it was real. And then, just as quickly, he was gone. The silence that followed was the loudest I had ever heard. The monitor let out a long, flat tone of sound I will never forget for as long as I live. A nurse entered swiftly, her expression softening as she realized what had happened. She turned off the monitor and gently placed a hand on my shoulder, but I barely felt it. I sat frozen, his hand still in mine, my thumb tracing over the skin that had already begun to cool. I wanted to scream, cry, beg him to come back, but I did none of those things. Instead, I whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for the years, for the laughter, for the forgiveness, for the love he gave me until his last breath." I don't remember much of the next few hours. Everything became a blur, signing papers, making calls, watching people come in and out of the room with sympathetic faces and carefully chosen words. I walked through it all like a ghost in my own story. I had walked away from him once, but he waited for me. He asked for me, and now he was gone. I felt the sharp contrast of absence where his presence used to live. The hospital bed, now empty, looked nothing like him. The room, once filled with tension and love and sorrow, now just felt hollow. A nurse came to collect his personal items, his watch, his wedding band, his phone. She placed them in a small plastic bag and handed them to me gently, as if they were fragile, but it was my heart that felt fragile. Everything inside me had cracked in places I didn't know existed. I walked home that day, left my car at the hospital, I think. I just needed to feel the earth beneath my feet, to know I still existed outside those sterile walls. It was a quiet walk. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears and your soul, begging you to notice it. The city moved around me like I was invisible. I passed a flower shop and for a split second I thought about buying roses. He used to do that when we fought, placing a single red rose on my pillow. It was his silent apology, but I kept walking. At home, the silence was even heavier. Every corner of our apartment held pieces of him, his shoes by the door, his favorite mug on the counter, a book half finished on the couch. I sat in the middle of the living room, surrounded by echoes of him. I opened the bag the nurse gave me and held his wedding band in my hand. It felt too small to carry the weight of our history. And yet, there it was, proof that we existed, that we loved, that we survived more than most couples ever do. I placed it on the table beside me and stared at it for hours. Time passed without me noticing. At some point, the sun set, and the room darkened. I didn't move, didn't eat, didn't cry. I just existed in that still, broken moment. That night, I dreamt of him. He was young again, smiling, holding out a rose, saying, "You came back?" I woke up with tears on my face, and a pain in my chest that I knew would never fully leave. Days passed, then weeks. The world moved on, but I didn't. I found myself doing strange things, folding his clothes like he was coming back, cooking his favorite meals only to throw them away uneaten, playing his favorite playlist while pretending I wasn't doing it for him. Grief is a strange creature. It doesn't move in a straight line. It circles you, dips under your skin, whispers memories when you least expect them. I would be in the middle of brushing my teeth and suddenly feel like I was drowning, or I'd laugh at a movie, and instantly feel guilty for finding joy. People began to check in less and less. At first, everyone called, "How are you holding up? Do you need anything?" But over time, the calls stopped. The texts grew short. And eventually, even the closest friends moved on with their lives. I didn't blame them. Grief is lonely, and most people don't know how to sit in someone else's sorrow for long. One evening, I returned to the hospital, not sure why. I found myself walking the same halls, passing the same vending machines, and eventually standing in front of the same room. It was empty now. A new name on the door. A new family facing the same heartbreak I had. I stood there for a long time before I felt a presence beside me. It was the same nurse. She recognized me instantly and gave me a soft smile. "I've been thinking about you," she said. "He really loved you, you know. The way he talked about you when you weren't in the room." Her voice trailed off. I felt my knees buckle again. She led me to the break room where we sat quietly. She poured tea, not asking if I wanted any, just knowing I needed something warm in my hands. We talked, mostly her, telling me stories about other patients, about how people say the most honest things when they're close to the end. "There's something about dying," she said, "that strips away everything false. What's left is pure." I nodded, not trusting my voice. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "He asked me to give this to you. I was supposed to wait a few days. Let you breathe first." My hands trembled as I took it. It was his handwriting. Messy, faded, but his. I opened it slowly, afraid of what it might say. It was a short note, just a few lines. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. Don't let my absence stop you from living. You gave me more than I ever deserved. And I forgive everything the things you never said out loud. Please forgive me too. For the times I was distant, for the pain, for leaving you. I love you always, Jay." I held the letter to my chest, feeling every word sink into my bones. The nurse placed a hand on mine and said, "He waited until the last moment to write that. Said he wanted to be sure of what he felt. Said he didn't want you to carry any more weight than you already do." I cried then. Not the soft tears of sorrow, but the aching, guttural sobs of a soul finally breaking open. That letter became my anchor. I read it every night for weeks, sometimes aloud, sometimes in silence. Each time it gave me something new, a little more strength, a little less guilt. It reminded me that love doesn't vanish with death, that even in his last moments he chose kindness. I started therapy. Slowly, I let people back in. I began to rebuild a life, not the same one we had, but a new version that honored what we shared. I kept his wedding band on a chain around my neck, wore it under my clothes, like a secret strength. I began volunteering at the same hospital, working with patients in palliative care. It was my way of staying close to him, of giving back the grace that had been given to me. I saw couples holding hands through their final days. I saw families fracture under the weight of goodbye, and I sat with them, listened, offered silence when words failed. One day, a woman sat beside her dying father, too numb to speak. I handed her tea, just like the nurse had done for me. "He knows you're here," I said. She looked at me through tears and nodded. That was enough. Life moved slowly, but it moved. I began to smile again, not out of habit, but out of real joy. I visited our favorite spots, not to mourn, but to remember. And sometimes I'd hear his voice in my head, soft, teasing, loving, and it no longer broke me. It held me together. He had been my greatest heartbreak, but also my greatest love. It's strange how we learn to live with grief, not by fighting it, but by folding it into ourselves like a familiar scar. There were days I'd wake up expecting him to still be there. I'd reach out in the early morning haze and feel nothing but cold sheets. Anymore, I began keeping a journal. Not for therapy, not for healing, but to speak to him. Every night I'd write a few lines. What I did that day, something that made me laugh, a moment I wished he could have seen. Sometimes I'd get angry, write furious, tear-stained pages yelling at him for dying, for leaving me alone, for making me carry both our stories now. But even then, I knew he'd understand. He always understood my silences better than my words. One evening, months after his passing, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was his old college friend he had only just heard. He was devastated, and we spoke for nearly 2 hours, sharing stories I had long forgotten. At the end of the call, he said, "He always said you were the only person who ever really saw him." That stayed with me, because I realized I had seen him, flawed, tired, stubborn, but also loyal, brave, deeply loving. I had loved him even when I didn't know how to show it. And he had loved me even when I pulled away. Maybe that's the most honest kind of love, the kind that survives both presence and absence, closeness and distance. A year passed, I lit a candle, and sat with the silence, letting the memories flood in but not drown me. I went to the park where I had sat the day I walked out of the hospital. It looked the same: the pond, the ducks, the old wooden bench. I sat down and whispered, "I'm sorry for walking away that day." And somewhere inside me, I heard his voice reply, "You came back. That's what matters." I smiled through tears, finally believing it. Later that evening, I returned home and opened the box I had avoided for months: his letters. Pictures, little trinkets that carried pieces of him. Among them, I found a small USB drive. I didn't remember seeing it before. I plugged it into my laptop, heart pounding. It contained a video. The date stamp was from 2 weeks before he passed. In the video, he was sitting up, smiling weakly at the camera. "If you're watching this," he said, "I'm probably gone. And if I know you, you're probably blaming yourself for something. Stop right now. You loved me. That's all I ever needed. The way you made me laugh. The way you held my hand. Even when you were angry, the way you stayed. Even when I pushed you away. That was love. And if I didn't say it enough, thank you for choosing me." Over and over, I covered my mouth, sobbing. His voice, his eyes, it was like he was there, reaching across time just to hold me one more time. That video became my lighthouse on the darkest nights. I watched it whenever I felt myself sinking, his voice pulling me back to shore. But more than comfort, it gave me a mission: to live, not just exist. Not just survive grief like a soldier limping home, but to really live. I started traveling again. Small trips at first, places we had planned to visit but never got the chance. I took his photograph with me, placed it in my journal beside little notes. Today, I saw the Eiffel Tower. I wrote, "You would have made a terrible joke about it leaning." In Rome, I sat on the Spanish steps and imagined us arguing about gelato flavors. In Kyoto, I walked through cherry blossoms alone, and for the first time, it didn't hurt. It felt peaceful. With every new place, I felt a little closer to healing, not because I was running from the past, but because I was carrying it forward. His love had not ended with his breath. It lived in me, and I realized I had a choice: to bury it with him or let it bloom into something new. I chose the latter, and slowly life rewarded me. I made new friends, built new routines. I even laughed freely again, without flinching. There were still nights I missed him so much it hurt, but they came less often, and they didn't paralyze me. I had learned to dance with the ache, to let it move through me like music. Eventually, I fell in love again. It was unexpected, quiet, and slow. He was kind, patient, and never tried to replace what I lost. He respected the shadow of the man who came before him and never tried to erase him. That mattered more than anything. I told him everything about the hospital, the note, the walk, the forgiveness. He listened without judgment, held me when I cried, celebrated when I smiled. And yet, there was a part of me I thought I would never give again: a sacred peace that belonged only to my husband. Until one night, I shared the video with him. He watched it, eyes full of tears, and said, he was lucky, but so am I. In that moment, I realized something beautiful. Grief and love are not enemies, they are companions. Grief carves space in us, and love fills it. They exist together, not in conflict, but in harmony. I still wear my first husband's ring on that chain, and every time it touches my skin, I remember who I was, who we were, and who I've become. The nurse once told me that people say the most honest things when they're dying, but I think the most honest thing my husband ever did was choose love in his final breath. He could have left me with guilt. Instead, he gave me peace. He gave me freedom. And that freedom led me here to a life not defined by loss, but built on its lessons. Now, years later, I sometimes visit the hospital not as a widow, not as a volunteer, but simply as someone who remembers. I leave flowers by the window of the room that once held our goodbye. I walk the halls and smile at the nurses. And when I see a loved one sitting beside a patient in silence, I offer a glance, a nod, a quiet understanding. Sometimes, I even speak to them, not with cliches or empty comfort, but with truth. Whatever you're feeling, it's okay. Just don't leave without saying what matters. And when I walk away, I always think of that nurse, the one who didn't just hand me a note or offer me tea, but gave me the message I carry to this day. He asked for you. For simple words that rewrote my story, they pulled me back from the edge, reminded me that even in my absence, love endured, that forgiveness was possible, that I mattered to him until the end. I walked away from my dying husband once, but I came back, and in doing so, I found something I never expected: peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of meaning. His death didn't end. Our love, it transformed it. And every breath I take now, every step I move forward, is a continuation of that love. I carry him with me not in grief, but in gratitude. Because in the end, love is not about holding on. It's about knowing when to let go and trusting that the heart remembers.